Well, I'm going to get us going. It is noon 01. So hello, everyone, and welcome. My name is David McElnay, and I'm representing the executive committee of the Urban Design Panel today and introducing our excellent panel presentation, which I want to check here because I don't want to get this wrong. Sorry, I'm not doing very well at this. I'm going to keep moving. So the Urban Design Panel is sponsored jointly by the American Institute of Architects, the American Planning Association, and the American Society of Landscape Architects, and is composed of professionals from those three organizations with a shared interest in urban design, as are all of you. We're joined today by Heather Wilson, who's the Executive Vice President and CEO of AIA Oregon. The AIA has previously hosted this event at the Center for Architecture in Portland, many will remember, and now generously offers this monthly Zoom meeting, which we've been going strong since COVID until further notice. In addition to a monthly email announcement, our panel presentations can be found on the AIA Oregon event calendar, as well as the weekly Thursdays at 3 newsletter, which is greatly appreciated on behalf of the Urban Design Panel. Participation in any event makes you a panel member. We encourage you to sign up for information about future presentations. When you register for any UDP presentation, as you did today, you'll be included in upcoming invitations. We also encourage you to send any interesting future panel presentation ideas to Kathy Wendland at AIA Oregon. And Kathy, if you would drop your email in the and or Heather and or any of us on the executive committee in the chat section. So this presentation, all presentations are recorded via Vimeo and are made available on the AIA website in a little archive folder for the Urban Design Panel. And we're going to be able to put a link in the box, in the chat box, for you to get there. This presentation will be approximately 30 minutes and be followed by a Q&A session, maybe 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. So for the Q&A, we're good. We're trying to start a new format of folks going ahead and raising their hands, but also while the presentation is going on, please drop your questions or comments in the Zoom chat box. Heather Wilson today is going to be our curator for Q&A. So we're going to be looking into that chat box. We'll be looking to call on raised hands following the presentation. And also follow-up questions can be sent directly to today's presenters via their email addresses. They've agreed to be available, and we'll ask them to drop it in the chat box when they can. So with that, without any further ado, I'm going to turn the meeting over to our presenters from Bora, and we're very excited to have you here. Please take it away.
Thanks so much, David. And I'm here with Joel Andersen with Andersen Construction. We have been working on this project now for several years, and we're grateful for the venue today. I think some of you may have seen this presentation before. Stacy Monroe, I'm noticing that you're here, and you could probably give this presentation at this point. We worked with Stacy as our design review liaison for the Ankeny project. And Dave, I know you've also seen this presentation, but I thought what we would do today is to really go through, I'll start out with some of the, first I'll share my screen so we can get to presentation here. Okay. Can everybody see my screen? Can I get a thumbs up from Kathy?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. And I'm going to do full screen here. So I'm going to walk through a bit of the impetus and history of the project, because I think that's really important context for our second topic, which is, you know, some of the roadblocks and challenges that have met this project. We started this in 2020, and we definitely have some updates to give to all of you today in terms of where the project is. So Joel will talk a little bit about some of the roadblocks and challenges, and then we'll wrap it up with how we move forward and where we sort of see the project going today. So, you know, I think what's been so fascinating in this project, really for all of us, but certainly for me professionally, is that it started as a building and then is, combined with an internship, but now it's actually grown into so much more beyond that. It's a wealth building opportunity. I think it's an internship and hopefully a pathway to a career in the AEC industry for young Black professionals. And I think that is so important because, I joined the profession 30 years ago, and, on the left, we haven't really changed all that much, as you can see on the right, as a profession. We still are kind of woefully underrepresented in terms of people of color in our industry. And I think, we've been trying, everybody's sort of been trying, but we've had really little success in the area of racial diversity. Where we've had gender diversity success, we really have not had any in the racial diversity area. There are still, I believe, 4 registered Black architects in the state of Oregon, and one is Bill Hart, who is technically retired. Although I guess once an architect, always an architect. But I think, this idea of diversifying our profession and bringing different perspectives to the table was really on our minds in 2020, certainly as Portland and really the nation exploded after so many of the awful murders that happened that spring, kind of the crescendo being George Floyd. And, we began to, I think, use our voices in lots of different ways. And it became pretty clear to us that you can't go to a protest on a Sunday and then just go back to work and have it be sort of same old thing on Monday. And we started to think, how could we really use our skills as architects and designers to do something about this? And in a discussion one day, we kind of cooked up what we thought was a pretty crazy idea that, could we use our skills to design affordable housing for young Black professionals in our industry? Could we remove a barrier to them living in Portland and sort of joining our profession? And at the same time, Joel was busy working with Self Enhancement Inc, SEI, looking into developing an internship and apprenticeship program for young Black professionals. And again, trying to diversify the construction industry, which has had very similar challenges in diversity. And Self Enhancement Inc was very, very open to this idea. Joel and his development partner, Ndamukong Suh, created HMS Development, and they were very, very interested in working on projects that had very much sort of equity and justice in mind. And when someone actually was Brad Nile sort of said, I told him a little bit about this idea that we had sat, and he said, well, you've got to talk to Joel because Joel's been thinking about this internship. So we sat down in September of 2020 in the courtyard of Andersen Construction, and Joel and I probably talked for about an hour. And at the end of it, Joel stood up and said, let's do this. And the Young Black Professionals, or YBP, Workforce Housing Initiative, was really born. It started first with 2 sites, Ankeny and Holgate, and eventually moved to a 3rd site, PCC Cascade. So you can see this is kind of a multi-site project. And it really was meant, in this rendition, it would have been about 200 units across all 3 sites, very much about micro studios, some 1-bedrooms, all of them at 60% AMI, with shared amenities at each site as well. The first site was on Ankeny and 12th, really, really interesting site, this L-shaped site that was in a great location, kind of very close in. And this one was a low bar, which you can see there to the left, facing 12th, and then a higher bar on facing Ankeny. And so really trying to nestle this into the residential houses. This is really on the line very much between the industrial and kind of a lower scale residential area. And trying to make sure that that fit in appropriately to the neighborhood. The idea here is that these young Black professionals live in this housing, and we certainly wanted them to become part of the community, part of the neighborhood. The second site was at Holgate and Cesar Chavez, and actually 38th and Holgate. And this was, big kudos to Julie Livingston and Jonathan Truck of Home Forward for pushing to make this happen. This is about a 10,000 square foot parcel on property that Home Forward owns. And this one was going to yield about 75 units on the site, similar micro units with some amenities, both at the edge and at the center. And then the third site, Rebecca Ocken and her colleagues at PCC became very interested in leveraging their land and partnering with developers to create affordable housing. And so they became very, very interested in this project and really, talked to HMS about partnering to develop this land on the southwest corner of PCC Cascades, so right along Killingsworth Avenue. So as you can see, all of those micro units are, similar across all three sites. So we were looking to do modular construction, and that was going to enable us to do sort of multiples of the typical studio, but also to combine that unit potentially with some others to make a few units that, accommodated someone who's married or, someone who might have someone else living with them. So perhaps a 1-bedroom and a 2-bedroom, but the typical was really that studio and micro living unit. The internship is something, Joel and Andersen has been now, I believe, in their 3rd year with an intern, several interns that they have at Andersen Construction. And that program has been going quite well. Bora has just finished our very first year as part of the internship and specifically devoted to architecture. We are looking forward with SEI to pulling in the engineering side. And I think there have even been conversations of other businesses in the real estate and development sector that may get involved eventually too. So that is definitely happening. In terms of the housing itself, so we did not run afoul of the Fair Housing Act of 1965. SEI actually leases the building from HMS, the owner, and that they use the internship as the preferencing for at first what probably would just be a few units, but ultimately would sort of grow in terms of these interns living in the housing. They would be there for 3 years, so over the course of that internship. SEI actually helped us to pull together a group early on of young Black professionals who, we wanted to talk with them about what would you want in this housing space? What does it feel to be welcoming? What does it look like for amenities? All of those things. What do you want in this housing space? And what do you very explicitly want outside of it? And that was a series of conversations that was pretty enlightening about the various, I would say one of the impacts that we had is originally we had one big shared kitchen at the end of the hall. And this group said, we're going to go to work every day and come home. We would like our own kitchens. And to be professionals who can come home and sort of do that in their own units. So we did change that. So there was some really interesting feedback that we received from that group that we did incorporate into the design, both of the units as well as the amenities. So that is the history of kind of the physical sort of design and internship. And Joel is now going to talk a little bit about one of the really interesting developments that came out of this process, which was the alt-cap investment model.
Thanks, Amy. So when this started and Amy showed the Ankeny site, that was that had originally come to us because I read an article in the Business Journal or somewhere that there was a local Black development group that was trying to get a project off the ground, but was running into all types of red tape. And so I reached out to Sue and said, hey, this might be something we can get involved with and support. And by the time we got involved, it really highlighted the struggles of trying to be an independent Black development organization. And so we stepped in and as HMS and helped that effort and found ourselves with this piece of property in an effort so that they didn't lose it. They were on the cusp of losing it. They were in arrears. And as we started to have conversations about the design that they had done and trying to make it work, we realized that design isn't going to work. At the same time, as Amy mentioned, we had this conversation. I was like, we got a perfect site that meets all the objectives of what we're trying to do. Let's go with it. And as we started to develop that idea further, it became apparent to us that this could be a very attractive model. And the premise behind the development was to build a for-profit affordable housing project, which didn't need public subsidies, outside of things that you could take advantage of. For example, property tax exemptions for being 60% AMI or less, and the SDC waivers on the front end of a project. And so we're like, okay, if you can apply those metrics, then we think there is a path forward to, making the deal pretty attractive. And that was important because if you can do that, then it starts to allow other people in the for-profit space to also be entering the affordable housing market as a competitive angle, which would then spur more, private development and not be such fierce competition for the very limited dollars that are in place for affordable housing. And so as we were continuing to flush that through, we realized, what we're missing here, though, is the community. While this concept is great for young Black professionals as a place to develop in a career within the real estate spectrum, right? Design, engineering, construction, manufacturing, finance, you name it. All it's doing is providing a place to live for so many, for somewhere in the neighborhood of 45 people at a given point in time. And that just seemed not big enough. And meanwhile, it's in the heart of a community that has been largely displaced over the years through gentrification. And so while we're trying to bring that back into the urban core, it was also didn't seem like that was enough to make that, that wasn't going to solve anything. That was just going to help move things along. But really what we were talking about is how can we create an economic engine that creates a way for displaced community members to participate in the real estate. And there's a lot of rules when you think about the systemic opposition to people advancing in our country. There's a lot of rules in place that preclude most people from participating, particularly in privately funded investments. Now, I will say that that's done in part as a protection measure, so you don't have people that are kind of unaware getting sold a bill of goods, and then somebody goes, oh, you know what, the deal didn't work, sorry, we lost your money, and so there's a threshold to protect there. And so a qualified investor is established by the SEC, the Security and Exchange Commissions. And so if you're going out for an offering to raise capital, you have to make sure, if it's one thing if you're doing it with friends and family, but if you're doing it en masse, then you have to do you have to ensure that every investor meets the qualified investor threshold, which is an annual income of $250,000 or $1 million of net worth, excluding the value of your home. So it quickly eliminates a whole bunch of people from being, and so you could have somebody who's an MIT professor of mathematics who doesn't meet those qualifications and is therefore not considered a qualified investor, which is crazy. And so that you can see that, like, but it's done as a protective measure. And there's this idea, and I don't mean to offend doctors, but we've done a lot of work with doctors who are highly educated. They meet the economic threshold, but they are far from qualified investors. And so, the math isn't the lone benchmark to determine a qualified investor, but that's how it's been set up. And as a result of that, it's been very exclusionary. So I'm sure you've heard of crowdsourced funding and things of that nature. There's a Regulation D offering within the SEC's rules that allow for unqualified investors to participate in smaller amounts. And so leveraging that concept, I was part of one of the first crowdfunding projects in America at the Fairhair Dumbbell in Portland. And it was a really interesting experience, very challenging. And there's a lot of rules that are set up as a protective mechanism there. But the concept was interesting to me. However, in this case, we wanted to target a very specific group of people, displaced, the displaced Black community. And SEI had a huge network as they work, they have a 40+ year history working in the Black community of Portland. And so between their relationships and our relationships, we felt that an appropriate avenue was to create an investment vehicle for community members. And to do that, we wanted to put in a way to allow economic expanse, but provide some controls to protect. And so we developed something called alt-cap, altruistic capital. And alt-cap is a concept that works like this. You take an investor who says, who's an accredited qualified investor who invests $100,000 in the project. And with that investment, we say, hey, we're really glad to have you. However, you're only going to get credit for 95% of your investment. So $95,000. You're going to give up $5,000 on the front end of the investment. What you get is a $5,000 tax write-off, which goes into the alt-cap community reinvestment fund for that project. That money then is used, it sits in a pot, and you can see here the green piggy bank on the screen. And what's happening there is the money from the investors is accruing. Then on the other side, you have what we call an alt-cap investor. This is somebody from the community who does not meet the threshold, who wants to be able to participate in real estate. They can invest anywhere from $500 to $5,000. We will match their investment dollar for dollar with the alt-cap community reinvestment fund. And so effectively, if they put in $500, we'll match it with $500. They have doubled their investment from the beginning of the project before it's even broke ground. So it creates a capacity for challenges in the project, and their return isn't diluted. They've been goosed by double at least in their return. And so what it starts to do ultimately as the project starts to perform is, if I can provide a return in an initial cash on cash basis of maybe 6 or 7% to a qualified investor, I can provide that same return of about 12 or 14% to an alt-cap investor. We can double their return profile relative to the amount of money they put in, because by doubling the credit. And so it's not about equity. It's actually about, we want to push those investors forward. While their investment is in fact smaller, we want them to play catch up, earning at twice the rate of everybody else relative to the amount they invested. And so that alt-cap was really a driving force behind these projects getting going. What would a story be without, the roadblocks and challenges that come? In this case, they have literally come at every turn of the bend. We started the project in 2020, as Amy mentioned, and we had a site, we had a team that was willing to work. We had a great concept through our, what's called a project technician program. And we've learned a lot about that. So if you've got any questions about how that program works, go ahead and save that for the chat, because we've learned a lot in our multiple years of running that program in partnership with SEI. But we started dealing with hyperinflation, right, first and foremost. And so that's put, as you're well aware, that's put just a total crunch on all housing right now. But when you're creating affordable housing and you're trying to do it without public subsidies, inflation is a real problem. And then interest rate raises create a second compounding impact. One of our solutions from the word go was the idea of manufacturing the units off-site. The Ankeny site in particular is very small, and there is no laydown space. You're building up against buildings and in between buildings, and so it's very complicated. And the concept was, let us use modular construction. Sue and I have a relationship with the firm IndieDwell. IndieDwell has a series of factories in the western part of the United States. And so we started down this road. Bora designed the units, a beautiful unit. We have a mock-up unit in my yard. I have the unit, and it's beautiful. It's an amazing place for somebody to live. We were informed that the state of Oregon will not accept a unit pre-manufactured outside of Oregon, Washington, or Idaho. And these units are coming from California. What makes these units special is they're not a wood-framed module. They're a steel-framed module. And they're built by a certified B Corp. They're doing all kinds of wonderful things. And the trucking is coming from Northern California. And so our design, everything that we had done, like it was ready to go. Our entire module set was complete. And the state said, I'm sorry, we won't accept it. So we tried and tried, and we're going, time out. We need housing, right? Absolutely. Well, here's how we're going to solve it. No, not. We won't accept it. And you're like, so then we don't need housing. No, we do. Well, we only can build it this way. Then I guess we can't build it. So that cycle repeats itself over and over again through our efforts in different forms. So the Ankeny site is a tiny site, as you've seen, and it's doing all kinds of good. It's all affordable housing, but it's privately funded. The design review, the way the code is written is if you have more than 50% of your units meeting 60% or less AMI, you don't have to go through design review, through a public design review process. We headed down that path only to find out that there is one piece of language at the very end that says, subject to you having public funds in place. To which we said, well, good news, we don't need public funds. And they said, oh no, then we won't accept it. So Amy and I were on a call with the then head of the Portland Housing Bureau and said, we have a building that's ready to go forward. Yes, I understand. But we need you to just waive this. Won't do it. Why? Well, because, it only works for publicly funded projects. We said, but it's affordable housing. What difference does that make? It doesn't matter. That's how we wrote the legislation. So it has to, so you have to take public money to do it. So there is no public money to take. There's like a queue of like 1,000 units for public money. We don't want to use it. No, sorry, we won't accept it. It was one of the most frustrating moments of my career, because we were literally talking to the Portland Housing Bureau, who is saying we need housing, and we're saying we're going to give it to you, and we're not asking anybody to pay for it, and they would not budge, which then forced us to go through a public design review process. And Amy can talk a little bit about what that did to impact the project.
Well, I think there were some things that, certainly added cost. I mean, we always appreciate design reviews commentary on proportion and how it fits into the neighborhood and things of that nature. But there were several comments about adding certain features, water features and other things like that did add, I think, to the cost burden of the project without really significantly sort of improving the lives of the people who are living in this building. So, eventually with the modular issue and some of the design review requests, I think the project from a cost standpoint really couldn't necessarily sort of move forward.
And so, as I mentioned, when we are working against a fixed income stream, right, on the development side. So unlike public affordable housing, there is no economics to public affordable housing. That's not why it's being built. And so it's so heavily subsidized. And the fees that are earned, if any of you are familiar with LIHTC, the low income housing tax credit program, it's heavily incentivized for developers to earn fees on the front end of a project because they won't earn anything throughout the rest of the project. And so what that does is it puts an enormous burden on the total cost of the project, which is why affordable housing is the most expensive housing to construct that we build anywhere. It outprices high-end condos with all of the insurance required. And that's a fundamental problem that exists. And so here we're trying to solve a private development solution for affordable housing, and the system is not set up to support that, is the bottom line. it does not recognize the value of private development trying to build affordable housing. And so the encumbrances that exist, and I'm not just saying that the value of a green roof or a water feature or solar, that those things aren't worth having, but the economics are so compressed when you're fixed on income. And so you can't, every dollar is so impactful. So it's not even about providing an excessive return. It's, will a bank even bother to finance it, right? Because there isn't enough, even though you can pretty much guarantee you can fill the units, you're filling them only at a capped number. That's it. That's the most you can spend. That somebody can spend is 60%. And so those numbers are fixed. And so your cost to develop, that threshold has to exist with space. Otherwise, the financing doesn't work, the underwriting doesn't work, and you really can't get an investor to buy off on it, even somebody who's got altruistic aspirations behind it. But at a certain point, it's too thin, and a bank won't underwrite it. And so those challenges were real. When we worked with Holgate, we worked, as Amy mentioned, we worked very closely with some of the leadership team. They actually came to us with this potential site. We worked through them. We actually acquired this really funky, weird, missing piece of site so that we could have a full corner. And unfortunately, as we got through to the, towards the end of the negotiation on Home Forward was not going to, the concept moving forward with like PCC and Home Forward was ground lease us. Don't sell us your sites, ground lease them. We'll operate them, for, 60 years, and then we'll turn them over to you. And that gives us enough time to be able to finance them and operate them for a long time. And then eventually they'll return back to these, public agencies or people that have ground leased institutions. And so as we work through those negotiations, someone on their board felt that they knew better than SEI as to the intention of what this project was trying to accomplish, and put in language that was unachievable. And SEI said, we cannot guarantee those numbers. And then it was the burden was actually not applied against SEI, but against us as the developer. And if SEI couldn't guarantee that they could fill 75 units over a 5-year period of time with young Black professionals, then our ground lease reverted back to market rate. So it went from $1 to market rate. But meanwhile, we would be fixed at 60% income. And so we just said, this doesn't make any sense. SEI met with them. And at the end, the board just said, no, we won't accept it. And so here you have 75 units that would have otherwise been built that are now, that site will sit empty because Home Forward brought it to us because they said, we'll never develop the site because it's too small to do the type of housing we're going to do. And so that site will just be locked forever out from development, unless Home Forward, at some point decides to carve it out and let somebody try to develop it. But it's terribly unfortunate. And so you end up with just layers of, getting punched pretty hard to try to make these deals work. And meanwhile, we're still moving forward with SEI and in developing our intern programs and expanding them and doing work with Jefferson now in the development of a CTE program that can help allow kids from the inner city that didn't know anything about construction, but they have access and entry into these same kind of spaces. And so we're developing a real pipeline of opportunity, but the housing component is being shot down at every function, even though we hear endlessly about how we need housing and what can we do to get housing and, how do we get more affordable housing? And so here we had viable solutions. We had the wherewithal, the capital, the relationships, everything that you would need. But the little bit of help that we needed from public agency to see it through just killed the deals, bottom line. And so unfortunately, I will say where the projects are today, and I think Amy can talk a little bit about where we're headed.
So moving forward, we do want to end on a positive note, and I think a commitment that we still very much want to see this through. I think it's changed. We're really sort of focusing on one site. There are three things that are really exciting about what could come next. One is that Joel and Sue are actually thinking about taking this across the country in presentations that Joel and I have done in numerous venues. I think people are quite interested in the model, both in the development model as well as the pairing with an internship program, and also giving a sort of wealth building opportunity and investment opportunity to the community. So I think that coming out of this whole process has been incredibly exciting. The second thing that's happening is Ankeny, we actually are looking right now at transition housing on this site. And I know that there are some provisions in a state bill that enables a little bit more of paving the way for that to happen on a site like this. So it's actually an incredible program that we're working with to try to get some people, transition them from being sort of houseless and into permanent living with some great wraparound services as well. And then finally, the internships are happening. We have a young man, Kevin Collier, who is in our office and has done an incredible amount of work helping us launch a whole knowledge management platform. He is a real contributor to the conversation here in our office, and we're giving him 3 years of soup to nuts. This is what the architecture profession looks like. PAE and KPFF and a couple of other firms are very interested in moving forward with an engineering component for young professionals who are interested in that avenue. And as I said earlier, Joel and Andersen really are 3 full years in, and they're actually starting to promote their, I believe one of your first or second ones, Joel, has now been promoted to a project technician 2. So they're moving up in the ranks of the business and out in the field and really doing some incredible work. I will say, I've been impressed with SEI in that they really want to vet their partners. Joel talked about the challenge of getting 75 young Black professionals into this building in a very compressed amount of time. I think rightly so, SEI wants to make sure that the motivation of their partners is right and is really on par with what they are trying to do for the Black community. So this is it's a slow bake over time, both in the development of this process and the internship and the projects, as you've sort of seen today. But we remain super committed, and we're excited to kind of continue working with PCC to try to make this happen on their campus. So I will stop sharing, and we can go to any questions.
All right. My goodness, thank you, Amy and Joe. And that was really terrific presentation. I had threw a bunch of questions in the chat, but I want to encourage anybody now to sort of take the chance to put your hand up or put stuff in the chat. We're ready to roll on Q&A.
David, I was going to moderate the chat, but it's you in there, so I'll let you handle those questions.
No. That's I welcome your role as chat moderator. Thanks, Heather.
No, it looks like yeah, you've posed the first questions that I don't know if they got to answering these during the presentation to your satisfaction. So really, these are for you to follow up on. The alternative method and means question.
Oh yeah. I mean, I'll just get it started. All right. So I had a couple specific questions, like did the teams look into alternative means and methods, building permits, when you ran into the roadblock that I know well, this question of the badged modular prefabricated structures in Oregon? Is that something that the city of Portland, or does it go through the state? Did you try AM&M?
We did not. I don't think that was an avenue for us on this one. The state was basically just, I think it comes down to an inspection agreement, honestly, in terms of just, will an inspector in California meet the standards that an inspector in Oregon would? And
Mhm.
that's why, the state has relationships with Idaho and Washington, but not with California. So it is a state permit, and in the assembly of all those units is a city permit. So we
Mhm.
did, we tried to track that down as much as we could. And, the answer was Idaho, Washington, or Oregon, or, go after the statute to change the statute, which is a 2+ year process.
Right. Understood. Yeah, just the thought that local municipalities sometimes are a little bit more, even the lessons that we learned in CLT, for example, it was a hard road to go down in multiple years, but finally City of Portland's on board. And then I think my other question was a little bit loosey-goosey, which was, I feel that there's something sort of greater than the sum of its parts in what you all have been thinking about and your other partners, what you're trying to put together. But is there something, beyond, you've got some housing and you've got some interns? Is it the combination or how they combine or is sort of greater than its parts? I just want to hear a little bit about that vision, if that's right.
I mean, Jill, I can jump in and then you can jump in as well. It definitely, we see this as a vehicle for, there are not many young Black professionals in either one of our industries for Joel and for me. And so, we are starting to bring in more, but they don't see in our professions a community. And we are trying to both create the community as well as create the pathway and the opportunity. So the idea of having this 3-year internship and the ability to then live in Portland affordably is that in living in community, you grow a professional community. There are young architects that I grew up with who now, Dave Oddy's one of them, right? Like he and I both started out as, young architects in the profession, and now we both sort of run firms. So it just giving this group of people a pathway to
Mhm.
making that community within our professions.
Neat.
What I will say is, I think that, and I'm a pretty optimistic individual. It takes a lot to get me down, and I'm by no means down, and I'm not down on our city. But I do think it's important that everybody understands the challenges that we're facing, and that, there's a lot of like, well, I thought this group was handling that, or I thought we were doing it this way. And we're not, we just haven't, like, the issue. And I've been having conversations with different people at City Hall relating to these very issues. There's a group of developers that are, just trying to help the city understand, listen, this, like in the trenches, we're telling you what's not working right now. So it's not, I don't know where you're getting your policy advice from, but it's not from people that are building or trying to build. And you got to start listening to those voices. I met with somebody from Governor Kotek's staff, Lance Killian and I did last week, and had a great conversation with them. And they said, we'd like to include you two in one of these, like the housing workshop teams, and described it a little bit. And when Lance and I hung up the phone, we said, who is on the team right now? Like, who is advising policy as it relates to, how we're getting these things done? Because we talk actively about how the governor's mandate is, I want to see 30,000 housing units built a year, which is, I'm like, it ain't happening. Under our current legislation, it will not happen. It cannot happen, right? Even when Portland is the biggest driver of housing and always has been. And even if the Portland metropolitan area, but we are stuck in our own way at every turn of the bend. And so if we're really in an emergency housing crisis, then we have to behave that way. And incrementalism is not the answer. And so it is important to talk about the harsh realities when things aren't working, so that everybody has a chance to to go, you know, I want to look into that a little deeper. I want to start applying some pressure and start having some conversations, because we can't just kind of like hope the needle eventually moves. Like we have to pivot it all the way around to contend with these issues. It's a little disappointing to me that here we had a program that was designed to serve young Black professionals. And even if you take out the young Black professionals, just an entirely affordable housing, 60% AMI building that doesn't get any support, privately funded. We take the same building, same design, and say we're going to do transitional housing, and everybody's doing backflips. Oh yeah, no problem. Like, well, and mind you, we're not taking public funds on that one either. So it feels very much what is the now concern, and that's a problem, right? For our state, like we have to address these issues in a bigger way, and that's as it relates to the housing. At the same time, what we have to be committed to is expanding the opportunities from people who are coming from backgrounds that don't even know our industry exists. Real estate doesn't even exist in the if you're out in the numbers, or or still in the inner city, or you've been forced out to Vancouver, but you were part of the inner city of Portland. The likelihood that real estate is even an industry that you can participate in is sub 2%, right? Would even know that. And so we're working really hard, but we need everybody to start to participate. Our industries have done a good job of developing college graduates for architecture, while excluding diversity. Just like we can continue to pump them out, and project engineers. What we don't have is labor forces to actually build buildings. And so we've got a aging out labor force. So it's going to be an over-designed, underbuilt environment in the next decade, where we will literally, it will be a competition, and it will strangle our industry. And that's not just in that's just not in Portland and Oregon. That's a nationwide impact. So unless we change our immigration policies as a whole to allow people to come in to do that kind of work, we're going to face a struggle. And so like I guess my challenge to everyone is get involved, start engaging people into the entire spectrum of the industry. Not just the going to college part, but the learning a skill and a trade. And I would say almost every tradesperson is earning more than than any architect or engineer that's graduating school right now. And they don't have any debt in the process of doing that. And that will continue. That will continue because there is far less of them than there is a need of.
I know probably others have questions. I haven't seen anything come up in the chat just yet, but I did want to ask about that specific piece, workforce development and internships. Bora is here, and Amy speaking about sort of looking at the architecture profession. Joel, you just mentioned construction. This is something, so I work for the city of Hillsborough. I'm the urban design planner and planning, and the workforce development crew has been grown exponentially over the last few years. We have a huge Latino Hispanic population in Hillsborough, for example, west side of the metro boundary, right? And we've greatly expanded our internship programs recently as well. So say those folks from us want to be involved, want to help, want to get in contact. Who are we talking about? I know it's your team, but everything kind of went past very quickly. So if someone would reach out, what are we talking about here?
So like, it really depends, and there's some these are, I mean, like now we're talking about like some mega shifts that have to occur, but like the school districts have long since abandoned trades as an option, and so there's a bit of a movement back towards CTE, but not every school has it, and most of them don't have them career path driven. So it's more like exposure, but then at the end of it, unless a kid graduates and says, I know what I want to be, most of them don't have a direct link to somewhere. There is really great in the construction industry. There's really great pre-apprenticeship programs that are state approved. They're typically paid pre-apprenticeships. POIC, Portland Youth Builders, Oregon Tradeswomen, Constructing Hope. They all are designed to bring people that have no knowledge base, that are coming from, backgrounds that have nothing to do with the building side, and allowing them to learn the basics of a skill. And upon graduation of that, they now have access to join a union, a trade union, right? And so that is one avenue. But I can tell you, at any point in time, there is only about 80 students going through a program, and they do 2 to 3 cohorts a year. That is not enough by any stretch of the imagination. So I do think that, we're talking about, fundamental shift. One of the programs that we're starting with Jefferson High School in Portland which is the inner city school that historically serves the Black community and is actually a legacy Black community school. So many of the students and their families have been gentrified out. But if you are legacy connected to Jefferson, you had a grandparent, parent, aunt, uncle, basically any tether that you can make, which is not difficult to make in the Black community because it's so small, you can attend Jefferson. And so that's what keeps Jefferson as still kind of the cultural epicenter of the city. They don't have a CTE program at all. And so, but we've started one this year. And so we've been working with the principal, Drake Shelton, who's really, forward thinking, and he's super excited. And so we have a CTE program that we got funded for, and we're putting a carpenter in as they're applying right now and to become a teacher, and they will become a teacher. And we're going to partner with POIC, which is a pre-approved state apprenticeship program, so that upon graduation of Jefferson, you will have met the pre-apprenticeship requirements, and you will graduate not only with your high school diploma, but also a certificate that allows you to have direct entry into the unions. And so I think that is an avenue that we want to pilot here, and then hopefully spin out so that we can create those kind of opportunities in schools. It doesn't have to necessarily be every school, although I think that would be ideal, because we are so short on labor. But we're like break the glass mode right now, because our industry, for perspective, the carpenters union, the average age in the carpenters union is like 48 now. And which for some of us doesn't sound that old, but for carpenters, they can retire at full benefits at 55. And so if that is the average age, it is leaning heavily towards the exit. And so we've got a lot of work to bring those age down. And we're seeing that across most unions. The electricians are the exception right now. They're doing better than most in terms of an age bring down, but sorry, that was a lot of
that's really great information. I think all of us are interested to hear. And when Joe, when you say we, are you talking Andersen Construction? Are you talking SCI? Who is we?
Yeah, I'm talking Andersen Construction.
Okay.
And so, our objective, same thing with the project technician program, is we're happy to be the tip of the spear, as it were. We want to be like, I spend my time only, I don't think about buildings anymore. I'm only thinking about what's next. So I'm looking 5 years in front, and seeing that, we're marching off the edge of a cliff, and we got to start actively working on those things now. And so our objective is, let's pilot these programs, not to own them, but to refine them, and then mass release them and say, okay, contractor partners, Hoffman, Skanska, Lease, Crutcher, Lewis, Walsh, Howard, all of you, let's all do this now. Right? This is how we're going to diversify our industry. So Bora, you pilot it, you bring them in, you figure out what it takes to bring on 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, and then go, okay, here's where we messed up, right? Here's how we will fix our program to be better suited. Okay, now ZGF, right? Now here's how you can do that program. Mm-hmm. And if everybody pulls at the same time, the program will collapse because, you know, it'll go in too many different directions. We've learned a lot in doing this. Construction is really white, really male, and really old. And so those combination of things, if you're a young Black person and you show up on a job site that has 100 workers, and you're the likelihood you might be the only Black person there. And that is incredibly intimidating and overwhelming. And so we've had to retool the program to be like, can't do that. We can't put somebody, and it wasn't a function, and this is the reality. Our teams are bought in. They love, you know, their technicians. They are it is not for not loving the person enough, but you can't overcome how somebody feels when they're the only person like them.
Mhm.
And so we said, okay, we have to revise the program. We have to have multiple people of color on site so that it doesn't feel isolating to be there.
Yeah, I think as an architect, that really leads me to the hope and the wish that, you know, that the architecture, the housing, the proximity of folks, that could really add value, you know, add strength and community, as you say, for young folks coming home from work and being around others that are thinking about the same thing. And I've noticed it, and I've run into this with affordable housing, of course, that there's limits and rules in terms of the design. But Amy, were there any tropes in the architectural designs where you felt you could enhance the sense of community, or how add to that concept of strength in numbers and similar values?
I mean, I think the amenity spaces in these buildings are hugely important. You know, the idea that the building shares a living room, or if not a couple of them, so that people can really kind of come together. I loved the idea of the group kitchen, because I think when Joel and I initially thought about this, it was like, oh, how great, like shared meals, shared kitchen, all of those things. But we heard pretty clearly from the group that was, you know, they wanted to engage in other areas, in other ways, other than sort of doing, you know, they wanted to have their own amenities in the unit as well. I think we tried also in each one of the locations to look at the neighborhood amenities, because we couldn't build all the square footage of amenities into our space that the neighborhood could provide.
Yeah.
So that's, I think Ankeny and 12th was a tremendous site. I think Holgate and 38th also has some nearby. And now, you know, PCC Cascades, that right there on Killingsworth, there's an incredible amount of, you know, both sort of retail, food, and education. I think PCC is pretty excited about having this audience.
Yeah, and I know that, just to give a shout to the whole region, PCC's become an active member about planting affordable housing,
Yeah.
you know, from here to Rock Creek. So that's great to hear. And I wanted everyone on the call and get the word out that there's new partners. I know Guy Ben from TriMet is here. You know, they just finished their transit-oriented development study across all of most of their sites. There's a new partner coming in with land strategically located that has come unlocked, and those are big new steps. So it's good to hear. Everyone's going to turn into a pumpkin and disappear in about 1 minute, because everybody's got to go move on with their work lives here. But it's really been terrific. There's so much going on here. Obviously, we could turn this into a 10-part series and ask you back all the time. But I would love it if we have your contact information. Hopefully you all encourage us reaching out. There are initiatives happening. I think that the pressure is building in the right direction, but we all got to keep talking to one another. So again, thank you so much for coming to the Urban Design Panel today and presenting all this wonderful work. Hang in there, keep swinging. Like I said, CLT went from a hard no to a yippee, where it should have done in Oregon first. So I think we can break some ground. I spent a lot of work in affordable housing on the East Coast in Philadelphia and New York City. They got that stuff figured out, but it's very, very large scale. So the West is literally, it's not just us. The sort of Oregon learning how to do at different scales is, I think, further down the curve than other places like Philly, New York City, other big cities. So hang in there.
Well, thank you,
Thanks
David.
again,
And thanks all
everyone. Thanks
for the
everyone for
invitation.
attending. Sorry, go ahead.
Just thanks for the invitation. Yeah, maybe have us back next May and we'll see where
Okay.
everything is. So,
We'll take you up on that because we're always looking for new topics. Anybody who's got a great idea, reach out and let us know. Have a great day, everyone.
thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks, everybody.